Rachel is an artist from Northern Nevada, where she earned her BFA at the University of Nevada, Reno. Deciding to leave sagebrush and 100-mile views, she drove east towards Connecticut to live under maple canopies. New England serves as her backdrop for explorations of desire, dreams, and the otherworldly while utilizing photography, video, animation, and book arts. Her recent exhibitions include Home at Woman Made Gallery, Chicago, Self-Conscious, New York, Photo Curator and Online Venue, and Being Without Being at Alexei von Schlippe Gallery in Avery Point. Take it away, Rachel.
Thank you, Janet. All right. Hello, my name is Rachel Dickson, and I'm a photographer, video artist, and animator. I'd like to begin by thanking my committee members, Janet Pritchard, Allison Paul, and Emily Larned, for challenging me and supporting me, as well as posing many, many questions that I still stay up late thinking about. And to my cohort, thank you for lifting me up and surrounding me with love and compassion throughout the highs and lows of life. And finally, thank you to all my family and friends for encouraging me and loving me through the countless stress-induced phone calls. I'd be lost without you. And hello, Mom. I know you're watching. All right. I wanted to start this talk from my hometown. I moved to Reno, Nevada when I was 6 years old. I remember the first time I drove into town. Just around the curve of I-80, the city revealed itself to me with flashing lights and neon colors. This is many people's first perception of the city: gambling, bars, and flashing lights. But this is the part of the landscape I grew up surrounded by: sprawling desert in the Spanish Springs foothills, sage and endless views, with the mountains cradling you in between. I would ride my bike and explore the desert, and as I matured, I ventured out to further locations with my car. This particular photograph is of Pyramid Lake Reservation and remains one of my favorite places. It holds a certain power over me, caked in mystery. I am lucky to explore this indigenous land. This is my home state, Nevada, large enough to fit approximately 20 Connecticut's inside of it. Downtown Reno remained the midpoint for me. This is where I attended school, met up with friends, and accessed my wonderful community. The city holds many unexpected things: a church casting shadows on the bar across the street, a drive-through chapel, or $4.99 steak and eggs from the Calneva Casino. If you followed the Truckee River, you could end up among the pines in the Sierra Nevada mountains of Lake Tahoe. Or if you follow it through the high desert, you'd land among sagebrush and the tufa rock structures of Pyramid Lake. I've always been in awe of the landscape around me, and the stars so clear at night, begging you to stare, and sometimes you might see something strange. I remember my first trip to Las Vegas. It's a 9-hour journey south from Reno. This led me to Rachel, Nevada, the closest town to Area 51. I convinced myself that I belonged here, remembering stories my grandfather told me of his UFO sightings in the 60s. It all made sense to me in a way I couldn't explain then. With my continued interest in the otherworldly, I became enamored with depictions of extraterrestrial life. In my later teen years, I naturally started watching The X-Files. But what held my attention the most was the character Fox Mulder, a man so obsessed and engrossed with finding the truth of what's out there, he disregards the life that has been given to him, obsessed with finding his abducted sister, with finding a truth that may not exist. He becomes removed from himself and the world around him. I suppose, in a way, I felt removed from myself when I first moved to Connecticut, unsure of how to navigate my landscape, unable to see what existed beyond the bend in the trees. I felt isolated. I started my journey at UConn making self-portraits, hoping that I could make sense of how I felt in this place and how I could begin making work in this new world. On a hike with a friend one day, we found a perfectly shed snakeskin sitting high on some shrubbery. We brought it home with us, and I made this image. Perhaps this was the sign I needed to start anew, a second skin. Also in this particular semester, I finished the strange and wonderful book of short stories by Miranda July, and this quote sang out to me. Are you angry? Punch a pillow. Was it satisfying? Not hardly. These days, people are too angry for punching. What you might try is stabbing. Take an old pillow and lay it on the front lawn. Stab it with a big pointy knife, again and again and again. Stab hard enough for the point of the knife to go into the ground. Stab until the pillow is gone and you are just stabbing the earth again and again, as if you want to kill it for continuing to spin, as if you are getting revenge for having to live on this planet day after day alone. At this point, I started investigating moving image. It felt like a natural transition. The work of Jeremy Shaw caught my attention. He made a work that functioned as this parafictional mockumentary. The characters in this film were part of a dystopian world, hoping to transcend time and space through choreographed dance and chanting, in hopes to enter a more liminal space where they could feel at peace. This was the first video I made in the program. Here, I investigated that in-between space, hoping to lock my viewers in a trance or meditative space, only to be pulled out by the static sounds and jerky movements of the body. These are the still images that accompanied the video in this particular series, aiming to elicit the same kind of sensations. Often using self-portraiture to act as characters within my frames, I seek to find a balance between reality and the transitional spaces of reflection and shadow. Susan Hiller is an artist that also explores these notions of the in-between, but also draws attention to the unknowns of our world, giving us spaces to navigate those boundaries, specifically with her installation Witness. Here, a constellation of speakers drops down from the ceiling, inviting the audience to listen to people reiterate their experiences of abduction or extraterrestrial happenings. These people that typically remain voiceless, mainly due to a society that casts them out as strange or phony. At this point, I began experimenting with animation and the possibilities it provided me to create experiences that are outside the boundaries of reality, a place where fiction coincides with the familiar. Using cut paper, 3D objects, and my own photographic imagery, I'm able to create surreal worlds where the possibilities are endless. Anything could happen. Replacing objects to create illusions frame by frame, or undulating the body of a snake, you become hyper-aware and attentive to every little shift. I am a huge fan of science fiction, whether it's movies, novels, or TV shows. While strange creatures and intergalactic travel is always a fascination, I was more drawn to the subgenres that blurred the line between my own reality and the one that seemed to loom over the not-so-distant future. Authors like Kurt Vonnegut, Ottessa Moshfegh, Louise Erdrich, and Octavia Butler resonate with me the most. Perhaps we are experiencing a reverse incarnation, a process where the spirit of the divine becomes lost in human physical nature. Perhaps the spark of divinity, which we experience as consciousness, is being reabsorbed into the boundless creativity of seething opportunistic life. A great wish courses through me. I am curious with desire. I want to see past my lifetime, past yours, into exactly what the paleontologists say will not exist, the narrative. I want to see the story. More than anything, I am frustrated by the fact that I'll never know how things turn out. And that is an excerpt from Louise Erdrich's novel, Future Home of the Living God. To understand this genre under an alternate lens, I decided to take a feminism and science fiction course. For my final project, I took on the role of a genderless alien life form, arriving on Earth to discover a confusing gender binary. In order for them to blend and assimilate into this new world, they decide to perform the female gender. Gregory Crutzen is an artist that considers the confines of fiction and reality, especially within his still life work. Playing with saturated color, rotting flesh, and taxidermy animals, he creates this sliver of a world that is attached to our existence, but transcends our expectations. If you know me, you know I love to search and forage through thrift and antique stores, taking home objects and trinkets I often integrate into my photographs. One day, I found a 1958 edition of E. E. Cummings' book, 95 Poems. The fragmented lines have always reminded me of a dreamed reality, perhaps piecing together thoughts from a waking morning, jumbled but coherent. Out of the lie of no rises a truth of yes. Only herself and who illimitability is, making fools understand, like wintry me, that not all matterings of mind equal one violet. This photographic work of mine became a reality when I began to question the legitimacy of my memory as it became saturated by my dreams. There was a period within the program where my sleep became part of my practice. The photographs I began to make became a way to cement what I was remembering of them, not necessarily to recreate what happened, but to force myself to separate dream material from recollected memories, or somehow converge the two if I couldn't decipher between them. Carefully fabricating these spaces, I used the familiar to introduce the unexpected. A dinner plate holds a birthday cake made of glass. A mobile-like object dangles from the ceiling, as if it were a spider strung on its web, waiting for an opportunity to slice through the air. With this same theme in mind, I decided to utilize collage to construct these dreamlike scenarios. During the start of the pandemic, I used what magazines I had around the house to create this imagery, carefully cutting the thin paper with a scalpel, configuring the bits to speak to something only our sleeping minds could think up. Later, these collages became a printed zine juxtaposed with text from famous psychologists analyzing the dreamscape, which include Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. This quote is from Carl Jung. Dreams are symbolic in order that they cannot be understood, in order that the wish, which is the source of the dream, may remain unknown. I sent these zines out in the mail to friends and family and felt connected to them again, at least for the time being. And while the words of Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud often contradicted one another, I found phrases that brought me comfort and solace. Often these statements solidified the things I concluded of my own dreams and aided me in interpreting them for myself. And in the words of Freud, the process of dreaming transfers cyclical intensity from what is important, but also objectionable, onto what is insignificant. Artist Sue DeBeer often investigated the psychological space of memory and dream in her video work. Here you see a peek of her multi-channel installation, where you sit back in silver beanbag chairs, watching the characters unfold their mind, while the video reveals two versions of the same story. The dual screen at times creates a meditative or even unsettling hypnotic space, giving a viewer an alternate perspective of the same situation. This brings me to my most recent work, where I intermingled the themes that I've been progressively exploring within my time here, giving my viewers a glimpse into a space that is both psychological and dreamlike, while traveling through nonlinear patterns, brushing upon notions of the otherworldly. As I end my journey in the program, I'm reminded of how far I've come to be here. It took a 50-hour drive with my brother by my side. But here I am 3 years later, ready to set permanent roots in New England and explore the strange world that I now call my home. And that concludes my talk. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. That was excellent. So while we have this inevitable little lag and wait, I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about you couch the beginning of your talk in landscape, and you talk about the shift from Nevada to Connecticut and it being disorienting and yet landscape does not seem to play as significant a role in your visual imagery as some other elements. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. So when I first moved here, I mean, the majority of my life I've grown up in Nevada and attended my undergrad there. And from any point you are in the city, you can really see 20 plus miles around you. There's really an unlimited visibility. And then moving here, I found myself, surrounded by these trees, not really sure how to place myself locationally, kind of confused about where things were. And I think that affected me the most in terms of the work I was making, especially with the feelings of isolation. I noticed I started getting these strange dreams happening, and feeling like I couldn't really get the same glimpses of the night sky. But yeah, I think the location definitely affected me more psychologically than it did visually, I suppose. But yeah, so I feel like that contributed most to the work that I've been making in the program.
It's always a shift to giving directions in north, south, east, west to left and right at the big rock.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, there's no monument or, follow that large casino with the sparkling lights, it's kind of just, well, you'll get a feel for it eventually.
Yeah, and the loss of the horizon line is something that people who haven't experienced it can't really imagine, but it is quite disorienting.
Definitely.
Claustrophobic at times as well.
Very
Yeah. Okay. Um,
I have a comment. I'll jump in
okay.
here for a moment. Um, I, just to go along with that question, since I'm from Colorado, the experience of being in the mountain states, and I'm sure that Shelby has some of this too, what things look like in the orienting in Denver to the mountains to the west, these sort of things. I found once living here, going international and going to Europe, going to England seemed much more natural, much more connected than what the experience had been moving from the West to the East Coast. And so it's like, it's like alien territory.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, it's a funny kind of contrast because I mean, people would probably think that the West has more of that alien territory type feeling to it, but I mean, the East definitely felt very alienating for me at first. Just so isolating, and also, that there's such a deep rooted history in the East Coast that, I mean, it's present in the West, but the sort of the the history of like colonialism and more sort of like folklore within the land and the woods, sort of feeling more alive and breathing, and like driving through these woods with my headlights feeling like something would pop out at any moment.
Which actually that does seem to be an experience that you translated pretty directly into your video. But we don't have a lot of time left, and nobody else has put any questions in yet. So I'm going to ask you about one other thing. Luke's done it to me again. All right, let's go with Luke's question. Rachel, how do you determine what is a video versus what is a photograph in your studio practice? For instance, the glass birthday cake being a still photograph versus a segment of a video.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, a video, I mean, it's sort of this progression of imagery, and a still image is just this single thing you can look at, and it has this penetrative effect on you, versus a video you have to see it linearly and in sequential order. So I feel like for me, when I want to elicit like more than one feeling or sensation or combined thoughts and feelings, like that's where I sort of transition into video. It usually just depends on what makes more sense to me intuitively too. Like with my photographs, usually I have a very particular image in mind when I first go about making my photographs, and then things sort of happen intuitively as I'm setting up my scene, and I'm very particular about it. Versus video making, I want things to sort of unfold in a more narrative fashion, whether that be linearly or non-linearly, and sort of giving an overall, I guess, feeling to my viewer, and adding that sound element as well, and sort of adding to that, trance or hypnotic state that I sort of want my viewers to fall into.
Okay, we have a question from Allison Paul. What were your thoughts and feelings as a child around your grandfather's alien sightings versus how you see them now, especially after making this body of work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as a child, I was just so fascinated to hear someone older and more mature, and someone that I really looked up to, sort of talking about something that seemed so fictional to me at that point. Like it was like a cartoon character that I had in my head, but then my grandfather saying, well, I saw this hovering spacecraft over a strip mall, and I work in the Air Force and I've never seen something like that. And then, just sort of becoming so enchanted by that, and that sort of carrying over into the things I've explored through my young adulthood. And I think now, I think I see them, more acting as like themes, and knowing that is part of my identity, and has sort of bled its way into the work I'm making now. I sort of resisted against it at first because I didn't want to come off as like hokey, but I realized that those themes are so important to me, specifically when thinking about like, especially in the pandemic, thinking about like, well, what's next? What else is out there? What else is going on in our world that we're unaware of? And sort of having something else to put that focus into that is not of Earth, I suppose.
So, we're almost out of time, but I was wondering if you could talk briefly about the influence of working in animation on your video work. There seems to have been somewhat of a progression, and if you could talk about that.
Yeah, animation was a lot of fun for me to play around with. I think with animation, it felt like I could be a bit more playful with my work, and I was more, I don't know, I was physically more intimate with my work, and I was hyper focusing on the movements and the details. Um, and at first it was strictly like cut paper and some 3D objects. And then as I moved into my most recent work, which you all can view online, I'm using like people's bodies. So I have like veins sort of in and out of someone's arm, and then I have like this sort of creature inserting itself into someone's nose. So I think just learning how to animate has provided me with so many opportunities and possibilities into things that I couldn't make happen before. The sort of fictional things that I have, been circulating my head, I can make come to life. So that's been a really exciting thing for me to explore throughout the past couple of semesters.